Hello and welcome back. So someone woke up the Carolina Hurricanes. Not only are they getting some goaltending finally, but Sebastian Aho, 11 points in his last 3 games. And if you own Svechnikov, this is what you've been waiting for, maybe for years. 4 goals, 3 assists, 7 points, 4 power play points in the last 3 games, which is incredible. If you owned him and you rode that out through that IR stint that he was on and then came off pretty quickly, you're pretty happy right now. If you dropped him, you're pretty angry right now. But we'll look at some more trending players at the end of this video, and we'll look at one of the most disappointing fantasy players maybe of all time. And we'll also look at some of the best waiver pickups for this week. So without any further ado, let's jump into the schedule. 48 games this week. We're back to the heavy Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule, and the light nights are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. As you can see at the bottom here, Buffalo, Edmonton, Seattle, St. Louis, all with only 2 games this week, so you might have to figure something out if those are your top guys. If you're playing McDavid this week, that's a perfect time to do so. If you have some, guys like Tage or any of these Edmonton guys, you're going to need to find some help on the waiver wire. And you could find that help from these teams. So all these teams at the top have 4 games: Calgary, Chicago, Winnipeg, and Washington. But the key here this week is the light night games, which is why we're also including Anaheim, who only has a 3-game week, but all of those games are on light nights. And the Devils have 2 light nights as well. There's a couple of other teams that have a light night or 2, but these are kind of the best schedules that you can look for. The number 1 schedule that we'll look at this week is Washington. They do have 4 games this week, 3 of them at home and on light nights. So we'll get into that right now as we'll look at the Washington waiver ads. Now, a quick disclaimer. Washington is 31st in the league in goals for per game at 2.29, so they don't score a lot. And these 2 games at the back end are against Carolina and LA, 2 very good defensive teams. The Devils have improved defensively, and the Penguins have pretty good goaltending, if not a good defensive team in front of them. So this could be very difficult if you're looking for offensive production from some of these guys. But you can find some other stuff, and there are a couple of guys that we do need to talk about. So first up, Dylan Strome. He's been one of the bright spots this year for Washington. 9 points in his last 12 isn't overwhelming, but 4 power play points. He's only 25% owned. He's on that top line with Ovechkin and Wilson. So he's getting the garden seat and he's getting some power play time on top of that. And he's one of the few guys that is producing, and it's pretty nice even split there, 5 goals, 4 assists. So he would be one of your better offensive ads this week. Normally Tom Wilson would be that kind of an offensive ad, but he hasn't had any points in his last 7 games. It's been all hits and shots. So a ton of hits, over 3 hits per game in that span. He's 61% owned, so he might not be there for you. And if you're looking for somebody who could potentially bring you some offense, it's Max Pacioretty. So 28% owned. He's set to come off the IR this week. Maybe, we were thinking he could come back on Saturday. That didn't end up happening. Now, if you're wondering what this looks like, so last year he got into 5 games. He had 3 goals, one of them on the power play, and then tore out his Achilles again. So that was very disappointing. I held on to him all year, and then he came in for those 5 games, looked really good, and then went right back out. In 21-22, 39 games, 19 goals, 18 assists, 37 points, almost a point per game, 4 power play goals, 12 power play points, and 4 game winners. So Pacioretty is one of the elite players in the league when he's healthy. We just have to hope that he is healthy. And if he is, he could be a nice scoring punch for this team that desperately needs some of that goal scoring in their lineup. You're looking at Pacioretty's preseason hub. This contains data for the last 5 years. And you can see here his trend was pretty well established. 72, 82, 80, 78, and then he kind of falls off a cliff here, and that's because no assists in those 5 games, and this was a very small sample size. But he is a shooter, he is a goal scorer, and he gets it done on the power play. And real quick, let's look at the last full-ish season that he's played. So this is 21-22 when he was playing for Vegas. You can see the goal scoring 96th percentile, close to a point per game, 93rd percentile there, 99th percentile in shot volume, 3.79 shots per game, and then 0.31 power play points per game, so a power play point every 3 games or so. So this is what he could do if he's healthy. That's just going to be the obvious big question. Can he stay healthy? If he can, he will be a nice addition to your roster. If he can't, it's probably low risk at this point since he's only 28% owned. So high reward, low risk option there. So that would be an option for you if you're looking for something off the waiver wire, and particularly for goal scoring for Pacioretty. Now, if you want some peripherals, there aren't a ton of guys getting it done for Washington, but we can look at another team that's been, that has a decent schedule this week, maybe not as good as Washington, and that is the Winnipeg Jets. Now, we talked about the Jets a couple weeks ago. I highlighted Ehlers and Vilardi as two of the best ads that particular week. I believe it was 2 weeks ago. At that time, Ehlers was 51% owned. He's now up to 71%. Vilardi was 23% owned, now up to 63%, but both of them are still really productive. Ehlers 10 points in his last 7, Vilardi 12 points in his last 7, and 3.42 shots per game. So Vilardi is a must own in any league format if he's there for you. Ehlers probably the same. He's a little bit behind Vilardi in terms of production, but they're both very productive, top 6, getting some power play time. And Vilardi is dual eligible, which makes him a little bit more valuable in my opinion. Ehlers could be dual eligible in certain league formats though, so keep an eye on that. But if you're looking for a guy who's trending in the right direction and a little bit lower ownership, Nito Niederreiter, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points, 2 power play points in his last 3 games. He's usually good for hits and shots and some goals. So that's normally what you're getting out of him. And then when the offensive production comes, that's a nice little bonus. And he is, I believe, getting some power play time as well. I think it's on the second unit, but that is helpful because he does have those 2 power play points in the last 3 games. And there's a number of opportunities here for some goal production. San Jose, Anaheim, those would be the 2 games that you would potentially want to add for because those are some high scoring opponent or high scoring options here. San Jose, one of the worst defensive teams in the league. Same with Anaheim. And Arizona, not quite as bad. So they're much better defensively, but all of these games, including this one against Tampa Bay, who hasn't been great defensively this year either. So could be a number of offensive opportunities here. Unlike Washington, you're not going to get a lot of offense there. You will get it here. And there are some other guys you could pick up for peripherals. Neil Pionk is a hits and blocks defenseman who's getting some power play time and getting some offensive production here and there. He's usually power play too, so you could go for Neil Pionk as well. And there's a couple of other guys for hits and blocks, but we're not going to go too deep into the weeds because we do have a lot to cover today. So with that said, let's take a look at the Anaheim Ducks, the other 3 light night roster. Now, there's a number of names on this list. I'm not going to go into too much detail with all of them, but with Henrique, he's probably your best bet in terms of who's hot right now. 6 points, 2 power play points in his last 6 games, 4 goals in that span. Center left wing dual eligible, which is nice, and he's only 15% owned, so he is available for you. And you have some time to go and pick him up. They don't play until Wednesday, and that's a game at home. All of these games are at home, as you can see down here: Toronto, Winnipeg, and Detroit. I don't know if that's a bonus or not because they're not necessarily the best home team, but they do have some guys that you can potentially own, as you can see from these ownership percentages. Now, if you want to go for a defenseman, and I did this over the past weekend, usually I would go with Cam Fowler. He's very good for blocks, assists, and some power play production. He is on one of the power play units, and right now, the power play units are a little bit weird because Troy Terry is out. We'll get to that in a second, but power play 1 is Killorn, Zegras, Carrick, Drysdale, and McTavish. Power play 2 is Silverberg, Henrique, Vetrano, Strome, and Fowler. Now, those are basically 1A and 1B in my opinion, so I wouldn't put too much stock into the fact that Drysdale's PP1, but if you did want to take a high risk, high reward shot on Jamie Drysdale, he's got a goal, 6 shots, 2 hits, 5 blocks in his last 2 games, and he's been relatively productive for the Ducks when he's been in there, and he's finally getting back to his form. So he was injured for a while, comes back, and it takes him a couple games to get going, but he has gotten going in the last 2. Normally, if you're looking for that defenseman, I prefer to go for the veteran who's been there before, who's averaging over 25 minutes of ice time per game in Cam Fowler. And he's been up as high as 30-plus minutes, which is not good for fantasy because the offense tends to dip when he's playing that much. But if he's in that 25-minute range, he is productive. 5 assists in his last 6 games and a power play point at that. Now, here's Troy Terry, and we have to talk about him. 6 points in his last 6 games, an even split between goals and assists. People were waiting a while for him to come alive, and he finally did, but now he's back to day-to-day. So I don't know what his status is going to be. They have some off days before they get to this game against Toronto. If he's healthy, he might be their best offensive ad because of the fact that he's a goal scorer with some shot volume, and he's been productive lately. But if he's dealing with something that's a nagging injury, that could be something to keep a note of, and potentially maybe you want to go in a different direction because of that. Last but not least, we can get to Mason McTavish. His ownership is too high for my liking. 3 assists in his last 2 games with some shots, hits, and blocks along the way. He is dual position eligible. This is a guy that you do tend to like because of the way he plays. He's kind of getting involved in everything. He's a really good player, kind of complete player in terms of a younger guy that's getting an opportunity in the top 6. But the only problem that I have with this is the ownership being too high for his production levels. It's not quite indicative of how good he is, and you probably won't be able to get him, which is why we mentioned a bunch of these other guys. But the reason why we're talking about all these guys is this perfect Wednesday, Friday, Sunday schedule, and the fact that a lot of these guys are available for you on your wire. Now, speaking of available for you on your wire, we have to turn now to one of the most disappointing files I've ever looked at in terms of fantasy hockey before we get into the trending players, and that is Jonathan Huberdeau. So I noticed this a couple days ago, and then this Brian Costello tweet sums it up great. This is the wildest stat I've seen in a while. Nathan MacKinnon has 27 points in the time since Jonathan Huberdeau got his last point. And you can see this is 12 games without a point. Absolutely nothing for Jonathan Huberdeau. They might want to think about sending him to the minors at this point. This is getting atrocious for anybody who potentially owned Huberdeau at any point this year. And I apologize to all of you if I recommended picking him up. I was doing that last year. I don't think I did it as much this year, but man, this has been extremely disappointing in terms of a fantasy file. Might be one of the most disappointing files we've ever seen, as he was a 1.34 point per game type player 2 years ago, 100+ player at that. And he has completely fallen off a cliff. Last year, he cut his production in half. This year, we're on pace for worse than that. So had to bring this up just because we talk about the trending players in a positive note, but we also have to talk about the guys that you just have to cut off of your roster. This is a guy that if anybody still owns him, you definitely need to drop him right now. But with that said, let's now take a look at some of the trending players over the last couple of weeks. So if you were watching last week, this will look a little bit more familiar, but basically what this is showing you players down here in the left who have improved each of the last 2 weeks. So change from the 17th to the 24th and from the 24th to the 31st, both positive. And we're sorting right now by completeness rating. And we will do some stuff here with the ownership filters as well. But you can see up here, this is the trending players since the 17th. Aho has been doing it not just this past week, 16 points in his last 7. And that is outpacing Nathan MacKinnon, who was just mentioned in that Huberdeau tweet, 13 points in his last 6. So 2.29 points per game for Aho, 2.17 for MacKinnon, which is crazy. Alex DeBrincat is back, 11 points in his last 6 games. So Patrick Kane has been boosting his production as well. Kane on here with 11 and 6 as well. So both of them with 1.83 points per game. And then you also have Zibanejad in there, 11 points in his last 6. And you will see Chris Kreider a little bit further down right there with 9 points in his last 6. So that Rangers power play has been getting it done. Panarin is also on this list. He's been getting it done, 50+ points by now. I believe he's 3rd or 4th in the NHL at the time of recording this video. Here you can see Chris Letang, that crazy 6-point game boosted him to 9 points in his last 5. And he was one of the guys I was mentioning in my buy low video, along with John Carlson, who started to play better. Igor Shesterkin has gone from a 902 save percentage to a 911 save percentage. So a lot of those guys have been getting it done. Ovechkin started scoring a little bit. So if you watched that buy low video, hopefully you picked up one of those guys that I was talking about, because they've all started to produce since that video dropped. You also have Sean Durzi here, who's playing really well, 7 points in his last 4 games, I should say. And then here's Svech, as we mentioned off the top. Kaprizov getting going as well. And then we've got some other names down here. Marcus Pettersson, a guy you can probably own. 8 points, 8 assists in his last 5 games is pretty crazy for a guy like Pettersson. And then you've got the usual suspects, Matthews, Barkov, Pastrnak, etc. But let's take a look at some of the guys that we can potentially own. So let's drop this ownership down to around, let's say 70%. And we will filter out a lot of these names because these are guys that you can probably maybe own depending on their ownership levels in a 12-team league. So you may not be able to get all of these guys, but there will be somebody for each league size. So we can start it off with Sanheim. He's been really good. 4 points in his last 5 games and then 2 blocks per game in that span. He's been a guy that's been pretty good all season long. He had a little bit of a dip, but he's now close to an 80. Essentially, if you round up, he is an 80 on the completeness rating. He is back to quarterbacking their power play, so that is helpful as well, though he doesn't have those power play points to show for it. But he's one of the better defensemen that you can probably find in a 12-team league if he's available on your wire. 59% owned, but he's been slightly improving week over week. Not a huge improvement last week, but the number one guy on this board. Now, Eeli Tolvanen has been a guy that has been getting a ton of hits volume. So as you can see here, 98th percentile in blocks, 90th in hits, 2.11 hits per game is really nice for Tolvanen. I wouldn't have expected this. I thought of him more as a goal scorer a couple of years ago, but he's come and made a nice little niche for himself playing with Seattle. Not getting quite the goal scoring he used to get, but 9 goals in 37 games on the season is not bad either. And he's still getting some offensive production, so 0.57 points per game is a little bit low. The shot volume is decent at 2.08. Power play production isn't crazy high, 5 power play points on the year, but you're getting him for the hits and blocks as a forward, which is pretty rare to find, which is why he's 98th percentile in blocks and 90th in hits. But really good numbers from Tolvanen. Also have to talk about Josh Norris, one of my favorite players in the league. Last 14 games, all of which in December, 7 goals, 3 assists, 10 points, 3 of those on the power play. And in his last 7 games, 5 goals, 2 assists, and those 3 power play points coming in the last 7. So he's been getting it done, especially lately in December. 92nd percentile in goal production, 12 goals in 28 games. He's also really good on the power play, 9 power play points, and he's getting some shot volume, 2.68 shots per game, but it's been a little bit higher over the last 7 games. So he does hit a little bit, which is nice, a hit per game or thereabouts. And then on top of that, you're getting elite goals, elite shots, and power play points out of him. He's a 78 on the completeness hub, so that is worth owning, and he's only 37% owned. As I've been mentioning a number of times on here, the Senators have a ton of games to make up and continue to play. They don't have the most favorable schedule now, but if you're holding him for the foreseeable future, they will have to make up a bunch of games. They will have a bunch of 4-game weeks going forward. So this is a longer-term hold for me. At 37%, he's a must-own in my eyes. So I definitely picked him up in the THHL league, the categories league I'm in, and he's been, kind of floating my goal category for a couple weeks now, as he's been really good in that category. Now, another guy we have to talk about, Nick Foligno, kind of coming out of nowhere. All of this happened in the last week, but 5 points in his last 6 games, 3 of those on the power play. The only issue here, he's a minus player, which, if you have plus minus, that is obviously an issue, but 44% shooting, that is unsustainable. But he does have 2 hits per game in this span, so you're getting him for the hits coverage and the blocks coverage, 2 hits, 1 block per game in that span, getting some power play points and some offensive production in general. And Chicago does have a 4-game week this week, so he would be an ownership, 6% ownership that is available for you in almost every league size. So if you're looking for a guy, they do play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but they also have a game on Sunday. So this could be a pickup for you late in the week if you're looking for that weekend back-to-back. And I don't necessarily see this continuing, but right now we do have to talk about it because it is one of the more productive guys on a team that's not very productive outside of Connor Bedard and a couple of others. But another guy we have to talk about, and I've been talking about him for a while now, is Robert Thomas. 7 points in his last 6 games, 1 power play point in that span. He's a plus player, 30% shooting, but it looks like it's potentially sustainable. He's been doing this for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months by now. 1.17 points per game, and you can see the rating trend, 69, 69, up to a 70, slowly, very incrementally just continuing to improve, which is what you like to see as a fantasy owner. You're not seeing these huge swings, these huge jumps, which you can ride the wave if that does happen. But what you do like to see in a player who's 66% owned is just continued improvement, and that's what you've gotten out of Thomas. Now, A little bit below him, you have Sean Couturier. He's been improving week over week. The offense didn't necessarily continue this past week. I believe he's got 2 goals in his last number of games, but he's been one of the better bright spots in terms of ownership for Philadelphia, and they've been one of the better teams that you can have access to because not a lot of people are paying attention to them. And then another guy that we have to talk about is Joel Farabee from the same team. So Farabee playing really well, 5 points in his last 5 games, a power play point, 9 shots, +5, 4 hits, 4 blocks, and he's, one of those guys that's dual eligible. You can pretty much find him on most waiver wires at 17% ownership. And if you're looking between Marchenko and Farabee, yes, you do have the 3 goals from Marchenko, but that was that hat trick game, and he hasn't done much since. So if you're owning Marchenko right now, you might want to think about dumping him for Farabee. Marchenko's still a pretty good own. He's a good goal scorer on that first power play unit, but Farabee has been outproducing him lately and has been improving a little bit more each week. So that is something to keep an eye on if you're looking at Philadelphia ads. Now, if you're in the market for a defenseman, I mentioned him a couple weeks ago, Thomas Harley, 4 points in his last 5 games, +3, 5 hits, 7 blocks. He's been steadily improving week over week. Now, he was quarterbacking a power play unit there. I believe it was power play 2, not getting those power play points right now, but 21% owned, and he was one of the better defensemen that was available a week or 2 ago. So this is a guy who's continued to improve. It hasn't slowed down, so that is something that you have to take note of. There are a number of other guys. You could look at Brock Faber, 4 points in his last 6, a power play point in that span as well, 9 hits, 7 blocks. So doing a little bit of everything, and he's been jumping from a 54 to a 61 to a 67. So it's a healthy 6-point jump in this past week and almost a 7-point jump the week before. And I mentioned him 3 or 4 weeks ago. So hopefully you went out and grabbed him when you had the opportunity. I had him on my roster. I dropped him for a little bit just because of guys coming in and out of the IR plus spots. So hopefully if you listened and picked him up, he's been working out really well for you. Here you have Gabe Vilardi, who we already talked about, but he's obviously still killing it, and the shooting percentage is still viable. You don't have to worry about that as much. You do have Ivan Barbashev here as well, 5 points in his last 6 games. That shooting percentage much higher, and that is definitely due for regression. But he's going to get you those hits. So 8 hits in 6 games is not bad at all, and he's getting you top-line exposure with Vegas. Now, we're not going to cover everybody here, but there were a couple of guys that we had to talk about. Anders Lee, 3 goals, 2 assists, 5 points in his last 5. Shooting percentage a little bit high, but he is one of those net front guys, so that does factor into the shooting percentage as well. We also have Chinakhov, so 5 points in his last 6 games, but if you look back a little bit further, 7 goals, 5 assists, 12 points in his last 10. So it's been going for a little bit longer than that now, and he might actually be a better own than Marchenko at the moment. That is kind of sacrilegious to say because Marchenko has the better line assignment and gets more power play time, but Chinakhov has been slightly better over this span, going from a 50 to a 59 all the way up to a 67, so becoming a more complete player with time, and he has been improving week over week, so that is something to keep an eye out if you're looking for Chinakhov. 9% ownership, so he's available for you in a lot of different leagues. Colton Sissons, a guy that I picked up off the waiver wire, 4 points in his last 6, 2 power play points, a ton of hits, 2 hits per game in that span. He is a minus player, but that shooting percentage isn't bad. Not necessarily scoring goals, but he is on the first power play unit, which is why I picked him up. He's playing with all of those elite players like Philip Forsberg, Roman Josi, etc. So that would be one of the main reasons to pick up Sissons. I picked him up for the weekend, and we'll hope, see how that works out today, but it didn't necessarily pay off yesterday. But there are some other guys that you can find here. Fantilli's been playing really well, 6 points in his last 6 games. I also picked him up in one of my leagues, and he's been really productive. It's just one of those situations where he's a young player. He's going to be hot and cold. Right now he's on a hot streak, so if you want to jump out and ride that hot streak, definitely pick him up now and hopefully ride that for a little bit. One other guy that I did want to touch on, if I can find him here, is Dylan Cousins. So 4 points in his last 5 games. Since they brought back, since Jack Quinn came off IR, they've put that line back together. Quinn, Cousins, and Peterka. They were really good last year around this time of year. And since they've put that line back together, he's jumped up quite a bit here. So Cousins would be a decent add. His ownership is a little bit high considering his production. But this is a situation where you could potentially go out and grab Peterka or Quinn to get you that exposure. And both of those guys have been playing pretty well. So This is the player hub for Jack Quinn. He's got 3 goals in 5 games, 12 shots in those 5 games as well. And while we're at it, let's take a look at Peterka, as he's been one of the more consistent guys for Buffalo. 2.7 shots per game. He's got 12 goals on the season. So he's been a goal scorer with some shot volume, a little bit of power play production, but nothing crazy there. But that line was really good last year, and they're starting to get back into the swing of things this year. So that's why I'm mentioning them here. Now, if you're looking for peripherals, one of the guys we have to talk about is Mario Ferraro. And he's been one of those hits and blocks guys for a long time now, but he's got 4 assists in the last 6 games, which is noteworthy. If you have plus minus, you definitely want to stay away from all the Sharks, but 14 blocks in 6 games is definitely worth noting, and he's also a hit per game in that stretch as well. So this is another guy, if you're looking for those peripherals mainly, he's been a guy getting it done. As we go towards the bottom here, the total change that they've had over the last 2 weeks is going to get a little bit lower, so they're a little bit less appealing. But you do have Marco Rossi here, 5 points in his last 6, 2 power play points, top 6 for Minnesota, and they've been much better since that coaching change, and he's been one of the guys to get a lot of that improvement. He is second in rookie scoring right now behind, obviously, Connor Bedard. He's tied for second, I believe, with 22 points. So this is a guy that is going to be a rookie. 11% owned is not crazy high. If you want to stream him, that would be the opportunity to go grab him. I wouldn't necessarily hold him for too long, as he is likely to regress just because of the fact that he's young, and young players are not as consistent as older players. But speaking of older players, Johnny Gaudreau finally waking up. He's been anything but consistent this year, but lately 8 points in his last 6 games. That is good to see. The shot volume is pretty low, but he is getting some power play production. And those 2 goals, one of them was really nice. I believe it was a breakaway. So he's finally starting to come into his own with Columbus. It's taken a long time to get there, but 55% owned. This would be one of your better options to add in Columbus if you don't want to go for Marchenko or Chinakhov. Gaudreau is usually one of those guys that's going to get you a ton of points. But that's going to do it for our look at some trending players. Next, let's take a look at some goalies and how the goalies have been performing over the last week. So as we turn to the goaltending now, there is one phenomenon that we have to take a look at, and that is Seattle goaltending. So if you've been paying attention lately, they've had Grubauer in for a while now, and he just hasn't found his form, and he goes down with an injury. They bring in Joey Decord, who's played really well, and then they also brought in Chris Driedger, who was really good a couple years ago. He's battled injury. Only 1 game on the year, but a .974 save percentage. This team defense is really nice for him. So Driedger was one of the better goaltenders last week. He is 1% owned, so he's available in every league. If you see him starting, you might want to go for it because of this team defense exposure and the fact that he is a pretty decent goaltender. But then you also have Joey Decord, who is another guy that you have to pay attention to. He was one of the better goaltenders over the last couple of weeks. He's 44% owned. But Decord up here close to the top of the rankings, and he's got that same defense exposure, a .915 save percentage, 2.5 goals against. He is right around expected. So not necessarily playing out of his mind. This is potentially repeatable. If he can continue to increase that goal saved above expected number, that will definitely help. He's got a shutout in that stretch as well. And he's been one of the better stories out of Seattle. They were kind of middling before they got this goaltending, and that seems to be all they've been missing for the last couple of years, is having good goaltending, which has been kind of prohibiting them from being one of those top teams. Last year they got it done with offense. This year they don't have that same offense going. They were a very high shooting percentage team last year, so that's come back down to earth. But this goaltending is worth owning, and as I mentioned, Decord 44% owned, Driedger 1% owned, so both of those guys are available for you, probably on your waiver wire in a 12-team league, but at least one of them should be available for you. Now, as we look at the longer-term trends, Vasilevsky going in the wrong direction, 2 bad starts for him. They're a very bad defensive team, which isn't what you like to see if you're a Vasilevsky owner like I am. 21st percentile in team defense is not great. Another guy who was down on that list is Darcy Kemper. He had a couple of bad starts. Both of those goaltenders and both of those teams lost to the Rangers, and both of those goalies gave up 5 goals in those games. So it is one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NHL that they're playing. But with that said, neither of these defenses, actually, Washington has a decent defense, but it's been hindered by their goaltending when Kemper's in. Lindgren has been better, and now Lindgren's day-to-day. So this is not necessarily the best file for Kemper or Vasilevsky, as you can see from the trend over here. Both of those guys are significant negatives. We also have to talk about UC Saros, who's down 9.14 points over the last week. He didn't have the best week, and it's been kind of up and down year for Saros. As I pull up his file here, he was one of the more consistent goaltenders over the last number of seasons. He's getting a ton of starts and some wins, so 93rd percentile in wins, a ton of saves. So he's just been kind of eating up everything, but the save percentage is relatively low for him at a 901. He's usually at least a 915 type of goaltender, 3.0 goals against, and he's 5 below expected, which is very unusual for him. So this would be kind of one of those anomalies where they're still in the playoff hunt. They still need him to play well, and he is still going to start a lot, but it hasn't necessarily gone great, and they did give a Scaroff a little bit of time in the previous game. He has a 943 save percentage in very limited amount of time. I wouldn't necessarily recommend picking him up, but if he is going to get the odd spot start, the team defense could be worse at 70 percentile. So, this is one of those situations that hopefully if you own Saros, you can ride this out with some other streaming options, but he's been regressing as you can see here. Some other guys that have been getting it done lately, we do have Kochetkov. And if you owned him and held out while he was going through that up and down stretch, it's starting to pay off for you. Now, last week, 2 games, 938 save percentage and 2 wins, 2.0 goals against in that span. And it's been kind of up and down for him. So last game, 926 save percentage. The game before that, 946. And then before that, he had an 821 and 5 goals against in a loss. And it seems to be the case when he does lose, 889 save percentage, 500 save percentage, 688 save percentage in his losses. So when he loses bad, which is why his save percentage is so low. But when he wins, he plays really well, and you're going to get those the team defense exposure, 91st percentile for Carolina. And as I mentioned, they do play, I believe it's Anaheim, or one of those teams that we looked at before. So they will have an opportunity to play, pretty well in front of him. They've been giving the run support lately, as you can see with Aho and Svechnikov having their coming out party last week. So Kochetkov is definitely a must own right now, 63% owned. So he may not be available for you in every league size, but he has been one of the bright spots as of late, as they did recall Antti Ranta, but I don't necessarily think of him as a safe starter. He did pick up the win against Montreal though, so that was a nice little bump there. Speaking of guys that, we've talked about in the last couple weeks, Vejmelka, he's been playing a little bit better lately. You still do have, all the way at the top here, Connor Ingram. He's still one of the best goaltenders in fantasy. Last week, he put up a shutout, 28 save shutout, so he was at the top of the goalie rankings, but he's 75% owned, so he may not be available for you. And believe it or not, Arizona's not a bad defensive team. So if you can go out and grab Vejmelka, a lot of you did last week, but it has been working relatively well for you. Another guy that we kind of have to touch on, and I don't know if he's on here, so we'll have to search his name, but because you want that good defensive exposure, Dave Riddick, Big Save Dave, 97th percentile in team defense, 2.75 expected goals against per game. That's what you're trying to own him for. He's got 2 wins, 951 save percentage, and 1 goal against. Last week, he had a 960 save percentage, 1 goal against, and he's only 4% owned. So this is kind of that Phoenix Copley play where you're not going to get Cam Talbot, who's the number 1 ranked goalie on the hub. And right now, you do have Copley on IR. I don't know how long his timetable is, but in the meantime, if Riddick is going to get any games, he's definitely worth an add. With that team defense exposure, he's 3 goals saved above expected, so that is positive as well, and that save percentage and goals against is really nice. So this is another file that you definitely want to have access to. And then another guy that we don't necessarily have all the way up here, the Devils looking to fix their goaltending situation. They called up Nico Dawes and sent Akira Schmid down. Dawes had a decent game the other night, so he is extremely low ownership, 4% owned. He had a 926 save percentage, 2.0 goals against the other night. and that was against Ottawa in a 6-2 win. So if they are going to use him at all, because Vanacek hasn't necessarily been great, this would be another option for you. The Devils' defensive game has gotten better in the last couple of weeks. They're up to 55th percentile now in team defense, so that is another option for you. And if you're looking for some more backups, a guy that we've been talking about for a little while now, Sam Ersson. So this team defense is another reason why you would own him. Same type of thing that we've been talking about with LA and Carolina. You're getting exposure to this team defense. He is above expected. The .902 save percentage is because of some shakier starts earlier on. But over the last couple of games, a .947, 900, .923, a shutout, 900, and then an .864, and that was back on December 12th. So he's been playing really well for the last number of games, and it seems like they're giving him a bunch of starts. And I think that's mainly due to Carter Hart kind of being in and out of the lineup, but he's been really good when he's in there. So both of these goaltenders are definitely ownable in fantasy right now, and they're ahead of some of these other guys that you would probably want, like Kochetkov and Quick, mainly because of this team defense that you're getting access to. And Ersson is one of the guys that you can probably own, as he's only 24% owned, so probably there for you in a 12-team league. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you got something good out of this. Hopefully it wasn't too long. I know it's been a while since a lot of you paid attention to fantasy with the holidays and everything, but let me know how you're doing in the comments section below. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.